Hey, everyone, and welcome. If you are here, you're probably past those initial, what is ADHD searches. You've likely heard the standard advice: diet, exercise, the works. But today we're going deeper, way deeper into the science of your child's amazing brain.
Because let's face it, raising a child with ADHD can feel like trying to read a map written in a language you don't quite understand. And while every child is unique, there's one key that often unlocks a deeper level of support: dopamine.
You're going to decode this neurotransmitter, understand why it's so crucial for those with ADHD, and most importantly, equip you with practical strategies to make a real difference.
You see, dopamine isn't just about feeling good, though. It plays a big part in that. It's the driving force behind motivation focus, that ability to hit the brakes on impulses, all those executive functions that can be a bit trickier with ADHD.
So it's like the brain's project manager, keeping everything organized and on track.
Exactly. Now imagine a project manager with a shortage of sticky notes and highlighters. It's harder for them to prioritize, delegate, and stay on schedule. That's what happens in the ADHD brain when dopamine levels are low.
So that makes so much sense. And I bet some of you are thinking, okay, so what determines these dopamine levels? Is it just bad luck?
Well, there's a genetic component for sure.
Mm.
We're actually starting to pinpoint specific genes like D8-1 and DRD4 that influence dopamine transportation and reception in the brain. Variations in these genes can increase the likelihood of ADHD.
So it's like inheriting a slightly different blueprint for how the brain handles dopamine.
Precisely. But it's crucial to remember, genetics is just the starting point, not the whole story. It's like inheriting a predisposition to being tall. Your environment and lifestyle still influence how tall you actually become.
When we talk environment, we're not just talking about where you live, right?
Yeah.
It's everything from air quality to those everyday stressors, even what we put into our bodies.
Absolutely. Think of it like this. Those genetically predisposed to being tall might not reach their full potential if they don't get proper nutrition growing up. Similarly, environmental factors can significantly impact how the ADHD brain develops and utilizes dopamine.
Okay, so genetics lays the groundwork, but our environment and choices play a huge role in how that story unfolds. It's not a done deal, which is really empowering to remember, right?
Absolutely. And that's where knowledge becomes power. By understanding these factors, we can start making targeted changes that positively influence dopamine and support the ADHD brain.
Okay, let's dive into those factors. We've got this genetic blueprint, this dopamine connection. What are some of those environmental culprits that can throw things out of whack?
Well, one major one is chronic stress. You see, when we experience stress, our bodies release cortisol, a hormone that in small doses is helpful. But when it's constantly elevated, it can wreak havoc on dopamine signaling.
So it's like having a constant fire alarm blaring in the background, making it hard to focus on anything else.
Exactly. And studies suggest that some children with ADHD might be even more sensitive to stress, meaning their systems are working on overdrive to maintain balance.
Which brings us to another culprit that's often overlooked: nutrition. We are what we eat, and that's especially true for the brain.
Absolutely. If you're not providing your body with the building blocks it needs to produce dopamine, you're already starting at a disadvantage.
So we're talking about the raw materials for those neurotransmitters. What are those exactly?
Well, one crucial one is tyrosine, an amino acid that serves as the precursor to dopamine. Think of it like this. You can have all the best tools in the world, but if you don't have the raw materials to build something, those tools are useless.
So if a child isn't getting enough tyrosine through their diet, it's like trying to build a house without enough bricks. You might get started, but it's not going to be very stable.
Precisely. And unfortunately, many common foods, especially processed ones, are lacking in these essential nutrients.
Which is why we'll be digging into those dopamine-boosting foods a bit later, arming you with practical tips to optimize your child's diet.
I'm looking forward to that part. But before we move on, it's important to touch on a couple of other factors that, while less common, can still impact dopamine levels.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, some medical conditions like thyroid disorders or vitamin deficiencies can mimic the symptoms of low dopamine. Second, while we're focusing on natural approaches today, it's worth noting that certain substances like amphetamines or even excessive caffeine can interfere with dopamine balance, especially in developing brains.
It's all about that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing these factors, having open conversations with your child's healthcare provider, and making informed choices.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to the practical strategies for naturally increasing dopamine, are there any questions about what we've covered so far?
Okay, so we've talked about how important dopamine is and some of the things that can deplete it. You know, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about what we can do to naturally increase those levels.
Absolutely. And the exciting thing is that many of these strategies are things you're likely already doing to some extent. It's about understanding the why behind them and then fine-tuning your approach to maximize their impact.
I love that. So it's not about overhauling your entire life, but rather making these small strategic tweaks that make a big difference.
Exactly. Let's start with something we touched on earlier, nutrition. Remember how we talked about tyrosine being a crucial building block for dopamine?
Yes, like the bricks for that dopamine house, right?
Exactly. So one of the most impactful things you can do is ensure your child's diet is rich in tyrosine-rich foods.
Okay, give us the goods. What are we adding to that grocery list?
Foods like lean meats, poultry, fish, especially those fatty fish like salmon that are also packed with brain-boosting omega-3s, are all great sources of tyrosine.
Makes sense. What about for those kids who aren't big meat eaters? Are there like plant-based options?
Absolutely. We've got almonds, avocados, bananas, even dark chocolate. All excellent sources of tyrosine. And let's not forget about eggs. They're like nature's multivitamin packed with protein-healthy fats, and yes, you guessed it, tyrosine.
Okay, so we're talking about making sure those meals are rich in these dopamine-boosting foods. But what about snack time? That's always a tricky one.
Snack time is a fantastic opportunity to sneak in some extra brain power. Instead of reaching for the processed snacks, have those dopamine-boosting options readily available.
Okay, I'm picturing a snack drawer makeover here.
Mm-hmm.
Out with the chips, in with the almonds and avocado.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of presentation. Cut those fruits and veggies into fun shapes. Create little snack platters with a variety of options. Make it appealing and fun.
Such a good point. It's not just about what we eat, but also how we present it, especially for kids.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to another powerful tool in our dopamine-boosting arsenal, exercise.
I knew you were going to say that. But in all seriousness, we've all heard about the benefits of exercise. But how does it actually impact those dopamine levels?
Well, when we engage in physical activity, our brains release a cascade of feel-good chemicals, including dopamine. It's like giving those dopamine receptors a little high five.
I love that analogy. So it's not just about physical health, it's about brain health too.
Exactly. And the best part is it doesn't have to be anything strenuous or time-consuming. Even short bursts of activity can make a difference.
So we're not talking about signing your child up for a marathon tomorrow.
Not unless they're already into marathons. The key is to find activities your child enjoys and will actually stick with. It could be dancing, swimming, playing tag at the park, or even just having a good old-fashioned pillow fight.
I love that. It's about making it fun and part of your routine.
Mhm.
And speaking of routine, let's talk about another crucial aspect of dopamine regulation: sleep,
Ah, yes, sleep, that often elusive necessity.
especially for parents of young children, right? But we know how important it is for everyone, especially for growing brains.
Absolutely. During sleep, our brains work hard, consolidating memories, clearing out toxins, and yes, resetting those dopamine levels. When we don't get enough sleep, those processes are disrupted, and we're more likely to experience those telltale signs of low dopamine. Fatigue, difficulty, focusing, irritability, the works.
So it's like hitting the refresh button on the brain.
Exactly. Now, I know establishing consistent sleep habits can be challenging, especially with kids with ADHD, but it's one of the most impactful gifts you can give their developing brains.
Okay, so what are your top tips for creating a sleep-conducive environment and encouraging those healthy sleep habits?
Consistency is key. Aim for a regular sleep-wake cycle, even on weekends, to help regulate the body's natural rhythm. Create a relaxing bedtime routine, warm bath calming music, a good book to signal to the brain that it's time to wind down, and perhaps most importantly, limit screen time at least an hour before bed.
The screens are a big one, aren't they?
Huge. That blue light emitted from screens interferes with melatonin production, the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. It's like telling your brain to stay awake when it's trying to power down for the night.
So we're talking about setting those boundaries and creating those healthy habits around screen time. And while we're on the topic of healthy habits, let's talk about another one that can have a profound impact on dopamine: stress management.
This is a big one. As we discussed earlier, chronic stress can deplete dopamine levels. Now, we can't eliminate stress entirely, but we can equip ourselves and our children with tools to navigate it more effectively.
Okay, so what are some of those tools?
Well, mindfulness practices like meditation or deep breathing exercises have been shown to have a remarkable impact on stress reduction. They help calm the nervous system, improve focus, and even increase gray matter in the brain, all things that can benefit those with ADHD.
Meditation for kids. Is that even possible?
It absolutely is, and it doesn't have to look like the traditional image of sitting cross-legged in silence for an hour. There are tons of kid-friendly meditation apps and guided visualizations that make it fun and engaging.
So it's about finding what works for your child and making it a part of your daily routine.
Precisely. Even something as simple as taking a few deep breaths together before starting homework or a challenging task can make a world of difference.
Those little moments of mindfulness can be so powerful. Okay, so we've covered diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management. What other natural strategies can help boost those dopamine levels? Well, we talked about nourishing the body and calming the mind, but what about those amazing ADHD brains themselves?
Right.
How can we actively engage them in a way that supports dopamine, production?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about activities that stimulate what's called neuroplasticity. That's the brain's incredible ability to rewire itself and form new connections.
So instead of just managing symptoms, we're actually helping the brain become more adaptable and resilient.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do this is through what I like to call brain building activities. These are activities that challenge the brain in a positive way, promoting those dopamine boosting connections.
Okay, give me some examples. What kinds of activities are we talking about?
Think puzzles, brain teasers, strategy games, anything that requires focus, problem solving, and a bit of mental effort. Even learning a new skill, like playing an instrument or speaking a new language, can have a significant impact.
So it's about finding those activities that light up your child's brain and make them want to keep coming back for more.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing is, these activities don't have to feel like work, that can be disguised as fun.
I love that. So it's about finding that sweet spot where challenge meets enjoyment. And speaking of enjoyment, I have to imagine that these brain-boosting activities can also be incredibly bonding for families to do together.
Absolutely. It's about creating those positive, enriching experiences that not only support brain health, but also strengthen those family bonds.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, even brain-building activities. Is there anything else parents should have on their radar when it comes to naturally supporting their child's ADHD?
We briefly touched on supplements earlier, and while I firmly believe that lifestyle changes should always be the first line of defense, there are some supplements that parents might want to, discuss with their child's healthcare provider.
And just to reiterate what we said before, this is not about self-treating or replacing professional medical advice. This is about having informed conversations with your child's doctor to determine if supplementation is appropriate and, if so, what's safe and effective.
Absolutely. With that said, some supplements that often come up in the conversation around ADHD include omega-3 fatty acids, magnesium, and probiotics.
We talked about omega-3s being found in fatty fish. Are there other sources, or is supplementation sometimes necessary?
You can get omega-3s from plant-based sources like flax seeds and walnuts, but supplementation might be necessary to reach optimal levels, especially for those who don't consume these foods regularly.
And what about magnesium? What's its role in brain health?
Magnesium plays a crucial role in over 300 enzymatic processes in the body, including those involved in neurotransmitter production and function. Studies have shown that even a mild magnesium deficiency can impair cognitive function and exacerbate ADHD symptoms.
Wow, that's pretty significant. And lastly, we have probiotics. We hear a lot about gut health these days, but how does it relate to the brain, and specifically to ADHD?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Research is uncovering more and more about the intricate connection between the gut and the brain. We now know that the gut produces and houses trillions of bacteria that actually influence brain function, including mood, focus, and even behavior.
So a healthy gut can translate to a healthier, happier brain.
Exactly. And that's where probiotics come in. They help replenish those good bacteria in the gut, supporting a balanced microbiome and, in turn, a healthier brain.
Okay, so we've got omega-3s for brain power, magnesium for those enzymatic processes, and probiotics for gut health. Again, it's all about those building blocks, right? Giving those amazing ADHD brains what they need to thrive.
Precisely. And while we're talking about thriving, I think it's important to end on a note of hope and empowerment. It can feel overwhelming to navigate the world of ADHD, but I want parents to know that they are not alone.
There's a whole community of support out there, from other parents to educators to healthcare professionals who are dedicated to helping these kids reach their full potential.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to ask for help, connect with others, and celebrate those small victories along the way. Every step you take towards understanding and supporting your child's ADHD is a step in the right direction.
Such an important message. So, as we wrap up this dopamine-powered deep dive, I want you to walk away with this. You are your child's best advocate. You have the power to make a real difference in their lives by implementing these strategies and working closely with their healthcare provider.
Absolutely. You've got this.
Thanks for diving deep with us. And remember, every brain is unique and every child deserves the chance to shine.